I'm Matt Gishard. This is No Holds Barred. Today we're going to talk about spousal privilege. Do you trust your spouse? And when your spouse can rat you out. So the question is, do you really trust your spouse? And I smile because cases come up oftentimes in a criminal context or in a civil context. And there's what we call spousal privilege. And that is a spouse in a lawful marriage cannot be compelled to testify against a spouse in any fashion, whether it's criminal or civil, but in a court of law. And the concept is, under the law, that we value the marriage relationship, and the law says we don't want to force a spouse to have to testify against the spouse. So a wife can't be compelled to testify against her husband in a court of law. But let's think about a criminal case. Wife talks to her husband after he climbs into the car and he's sweating and he says, "I just killed a person." Who? And he tells her. After a period of time, the husband and wife divorce. And a couple of years later, enough evidence comes forward to charge the husband for the murder of this individual. And the wife says, "I've had enough. I'm divorced from him, and I'm going to testify against him." Now, there's no spousal privilege because they're not married. But if they were married, she could still waive the spousal privilege because she's the one who's testifying. At trial, she testified. And I asked her, what did he say when he got in the car? And an objection, confidential marital communication. So there are actually two privileges. One is the spousal privilege, which can be waived even if there's a marriage. The other is confidential marital communication. And that is, during the marriage, there was a confidential communication between the husband and the wife with no one else present. And that privilege is held by both. So the husband could object and preclude the wife from testifying as to what he said. That's a confidential marital communication. Interesting, because we have those two and most people don't understand it. Now, if they had been in a restaurant with lots of people around and he had absolutely no expectation of privacy and no expectation that others didn't hear, then perhaps that confidential marital communication was waived. Because what? Because it wasn't confidential. It was said in front of other people, knowing that other people were there. That's how it works. In this particular case, I was able to ask her, well, what was his demeanor? Did he have anything in his hand? And she answered, yes, a gun. Was he sweating? Tell us, describe for us. And she described for us everything but what he said when he got in the car. And I guess the moral of this story is he was convicted of the murder because, in fact, he was the murderer. So I know that the difference between spousal privilege and that confidential marital communication can be confusing. So let me give you an example. Husband and wife are married. Wife gives a statement to the police. She's waiving her spousal privilege and says, my husband committed the murder, and he told me he committed the murder. All right, that statement is in a police report. Fast forward to trial. Wife is waiving her spousal privilege. She is still married. She has a spousal privilege, but she's waiving it. She waived it in the police report. She's waiving it at trial. But the confidential marital communication privilege is held by the husband. And the discussion between the husband and wife, when he said he killed the person, was a confidential marital communication. No one else was present. At trial, the husband can invoke that and preclude the wife from saying anything about what he told her in confidence. So the spousal privilege only applies when there is a marriage. If they were divorced, there's no spousal privilege to be claimed. The confidential marital communication privilege lasts till the end of time, and it can't be waived, and it is held by both. So if the husband doesn't want her to state what he said, and they're divorced, she cannot, in a court of law, testify as to that confidential marital communication. So in summary, it really doesn't matter whether you trust your spouse or not. There are certain protections that can't be waived. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. It really helps us with the YouTube algorithms. See you next time on No Holds Barred.